I've been working in tech in some sort of role since around 2014, and I've also been really lucky to have been a part of a lot of other people's learning to code journey through teaching at boot camps and writing online. And so I wanted to come to you today with my advice of things that I wish that I knew before I was a software engineer. So the first thing is that you don't need to know everything. I remember early on in my career, whenever Udemy had sales, I would just stock up on courses on anything like .NET, C#, Angular, React, Vue, pretty much any technology that you could imagine. I would just stockpile courses on them. And most of those things I've never used in my career or even brought up because I don't know them well enough to put them on my resume or work in them professionally or anything like that. What I think is more valuable is to narrow down and have a couple of technologies that you're really passionate about and that you really enjoy working in that the industry uses, and really niche down and focus on those things instead of the million and one other things that are out there. There's this concept in tech called shiny object syndrome, and it's when something new comes out or you learn about this new technology and you immediately want to drop everything that you're working on and move to that. And there is some validity in that of using the new and fresh things and learning them as they come out, but for the most part, rewriting your whole entire application from scratch every other week is not super great as a business strategy. So I, again, would pick a couple of things, focus on those, and once you go further in your career, the idea of being T-shaped in your knowledge, I think, is really useful. So being T-shaped in your knowledge is when you have one or two things that you are specialized in and you are an expert at. So that would be the long side of the T. And then the other side of the T would be the other things that you know in shallow amounts, but you're not necessarily an expert in. So for me, I really specialize in Python and JavaScript, but I also know CSS, HTML, how to build an API in Node, lots of different things, but they're not something that I would pursue as my whole career. They're just things that I can speak to. So when you're starting out, pick a couple of technologies that you enjoy, learn a lot about those, build some applications with them to show off your skills, but don't worry about knowing everything. It's completely impossible. And there are so many things that I still need to Google and everybody else needs to as well. You don't need to memorize everything. You have these resources available to you no matter what. And so you can always return to those as needed. You do not need to have everything memorized or know every single piece of an API. That's what documentation is for. My next piece of advice is to learn your developer tools. So there are so many different amazing tools that will make development and your workflows much easier. My favorite are Visual Studio Code, iTerm, ZSH or Z Shell, and I use Chrome primarily for development. But you can learn some other ones as well, so maybe Atom or Sublime for a text editor, maybe this built-in terminal instead of iTerm, and Firefox or one of the other browsers that are out there instead of Chrome. But my recommendation is to dive deep into those because it'll make your life so much easier if you know how to work those, the different shortcuts that are built in, the different extensions or packages that you can use to make it easier, how to navigate your way around. All of these things will make your life so much faster as a developer. For example, I would make typos all the time if I didn't know Emmet. Emmet is one of my favorite toolkits for writing HTML, CSS, and I think you can do some JavaScript too. So it'll make writing all of that much easier and much faster. In addition, knowing your browser will help you debug faster if you're doing web development as well. So know your tools, don't type everything from scratch. Get used to them and comfortable with them. It will be very worthwhile no matter what you specialize in down the road. Along similar lines, I would also get good at debugging and have debugging strategies because most of code is not writing new code, it's debugging the code that you've already written or that's already written in your application. There's so many different strategies here, from just console logging or printing out what your variables are to more complex tools like the debugger or breakpoints or even using your text editor for debugging. There are so many strategies here, but getting used to those and having some sort of logical workflow that you go through when you find a bug is going to make you so much faster as a developer, and it's going to make it so that those red error messages are much less scary than they were at the beginning of your programming journey. Another huge piece of advice for those starting out is to not get stuck in doing the cycle of tutorials. And this is something that I see so often with new developers, is that you do tutorial after tutorial on learning something, but you're not actually making it stick by building your own projects with that thing. It's easy enough to follow step by step what somebody else is doing, but test yourself by building something that's different from a tutorial, or you could add a feature to a tutorial that you've already completed. That will test your knowledge and actually make you use the problem-solving skills, which are the most difficult part of learning to code. On the job, you'll be required to put the different things that you've learned in combination together to solve problems. And so it's so important that you are able to put those things that you've learned together and solve things yourself. So don't just do tutorial after tutorial after tutorial without ever testing yourself or building something on your own. And something that will help with that is to write pseudocode. So pseudocode is when you write in plain English or in words that make sense to you what your code is going to do. So instead of worrying about syntax and worrying about writing perfectly executing code, instead what you're doing is you're thinking through the problem, you're thinking about what steps you're going to need to take with your code in the future in order to make your code do what you want it to. So writing pseudocode will usually speed up the process and make it so that problems are easier to solve. It's really helpful for doing things like code challenges as well. My next piece of advice is definitely something that I wish that I had done sooner. And this is to get involved with the coding community. There are so many in-person meetups, conferences, and other communities that you can join, at least during normal years when we're not shut down due to coronavirus. But even if those options are not available to you because you live in a remote area or you have other obligations after work or things are still shut down, there are a ton of online communities as well. So some things that I would recommend would be to join either Slack or Discord groups. You can also start writing developer blogs and posting to places like Dev2. You can post on forums like Stack Overflow or posting on YouTube or Dev2 or Twitch streaming. So many different ways that you can create content as a developer. You can even just, as low-hanging fruit, post something on Twitter or another social network that you enjoy. You don't have to go in super deep at first, but there are so many reasons why this is helpful. First, you'll have a community around you of people who are in similar shoes to your own that you can rely on. You can also get code help from these communities, so if you're struggling on something, that can also be huge. And it's really great for networking as well. If you're producing content, it's great to put that on your resume so you can show it off to future employers and really demonstrate your knowledge. That's been huge for my career personally. But even if you're not producing content, if you're just making connections, those people are more likely to vouch for you or recommend you for jobs in the future at their companies. So it's great for networking as well. I would highly recommend getting involved with the developer community. It has been so influential for my career, both personally and career-wise. That being said, sometimes when you are in these developer communities, you can see people gatekeeping or putting people down for their lack of knowledge in certain areas or just being rude for the sake of being rude. And something to remember is that somebody being rude is a them problem, not a you problem. So this is something that I've had to build up over my career, especially when being online and public there, is that sometimes people can be not very nice, especially because they can be anonymous online, but them being rude shows that they're going through something difficult, that they have biases or are bigoted, not that you actually have a problem with you. So that's something to build up early, is that people being rude to you is their problem, not necessarily yours. And yes, it sucks. It's not great that people do that and it can really hurt, but having that perspective that it's not your fault, it's them being rude, is really important. And this is something that you can see at work as well. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's not your fault, it's that person's fault. The next thing that I want to talk about is that there are multiple ways to get into the industry. When I learned how to code, I was 19 years old in a computer science classroom. I had no idea what programming was, and I thought that I was way too old to learn this and that it wasn't going to be the right fit for me. I also quit computer science after a couple of courses, so I thought that that meant that I couldn't get a career in tech. But I obviously have, and actually later that same year I got my first job in the industry. I pretty much exclusively self-taught myself web development. And there are so many people that I've worked with that are in similar boats, or maybe they didn't have computer science at all, maybe they didn't even go to college, or they went through boot camps. I worked at a boot camp for a lot of years and have seen so many of those students go on to be very successful in the field. And then there are a lot of people who do go through computer science degrees. And all these various backgrounds come together to build more perspectives and a more diverse developer community. And so even if you didn't start programming at 7 years old, like you'll see some hackers on TV or whatever, that doesn't mean that you can't pursue a job in the industry. And you don't necessarily need to go back for a 4-year computer science degree either. There are so many people in this field who are from less traditional backgrounds. And if you're in that boat, if you're somebody who is transitioning into the field later in life, know that your previous careers still have validity within the industry. Many of those skills are transferable. Say you were doing something with problem solving, you're gonna have to do that a lot. Or working with clients, you're gonna probably have to do that if you do client work as well. Or teaching things. Pretty much all of my jobs in tech have highly required teaching skills, whether that was mentoring junior developers or doing public facing events or actually teaching full-time as a boot camp instructor. So there's so many different very valid ways to get into the industry, and don't discount your previous experiences if you have them. My next piece of advice is that learning is not always easy. I think it's tempting to think that you're going to start learning something and then that skill is going to build and you're going to learn more and more and more. It's going to be a very linear process, and once you learn something, it's going to stick. Well, it's usually more difficult than that. There are usually a lot of highs and lows in that journey. And the highs are great, where you fix a bug, or you have your application working, or you build something really cool, and that's amazing. Those are the really high points. But then there are also days where things are difficult, where things don't stick, where maybe you really struggle and have a bug that you cannot get through. And those days happen as well, and it's important to note that. And it can often feel the most difficult right before you actually have that breakthrough and learn that new thing. And you'll forget things over time as well. And all these things are very natural pieces of the learning journey. It's important to remember that coming in, that it's not always going to be super easy to learn something new. That's valid and very much to be expected. Programming is pretty hard. That's why it's such an in-demand career path. So if it's something that you're struggling with or have difficulty, know that you're not alone in that. And it's also important to go back to those communities that I was talking about before, so that you have connections and somebody to empathize with you when you're going through that. And my last piece of advice is pretty well linked into this one, and that is to have a confidence building strategy. Again, you can have really hard days when you are learning to code or when you are fully entrenched in your career. Imposter syndrome is something that you'll hear spoken about a lot, and that is feeling like your accomplishments are not valid even when to an external observer they definitely are. And that's something that I still deal with as somebody who's been in the industry and has a senior title and has for quite a few years now. Have a strategy for when you're having those difficult days or you're feeling like maybe you're giving up or that this isn't for you. Have some sort of strategy to build yourself back up. So something that I do is I have a GitHub repository where I track my wins in it. So cool things that I've built that have been a little bit outside of my reach, or things that have become easier for me over time. Nice things that people have said, both in performance reviews and from friends. I try to keep track of those so that when I'm having a difficult day, I can look back on those. But I also know that there are other strategies like reaching out to a friend who might be in a similar position, or giving yourself an easy win. So building something that you're confident in and know that you can accomplish in a short amount of time. So make sure to have a strategy to come back to in case you are having a difficult day or you feel like giving up, so that you can look back on that and build your confidence back up again. So those were 10 things that I wish that I knew when I was just starting out in the industry. I hope that they were really helpful. If they were, give me a thumbs up on this video and subscribe so you can see my other videos. And I'm really excited to keep doing this YouTube thing. So see you next time.